You can hear me?
Oh yeah, you sound so good, like Frank Sinatra.
Okay. All right. We left off. We started a new chapter in Hilchas Yesodei Hatorah, Perek Vav. And the beginning of Perek Vav discusses the lotase of erasing God's name, right? If you remember, the source was lotasun ken Lashem Elokechem. Okay. That's the source from Parshas Re'eh. And in the first four or five halachas, it spoke about the different names that God has. Okay, we spoke about that. We spoke about if you have a letter before or letter after, right? Different laws about that. And then we left off at five, parak halacha hey, where it said a kinoi, like a nickname that God has, like Rachum, Chanun, Gibor, Nora, Neman, right? All of these adjectives that we use, we say that is, although it's an adjective, um, they can be erased. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how about if you have the name of God on a dish, for example, on a plate. All right, I don't recommend this at home, right? It's not a good thing. But if you happen to come across a kli, halachavav, kli shahai Hashem kasuv alav, okay, so when you have God's name written on a kli, so what do? Kotzetz etz mekom Hashem begonzo. So we spoke about this concept of geniza, right? Like the Shemus truck, right? We have to throw away the Shemus, right, in a certain location. So too, that is what we call geniza, which literally means to hide, right? Deep down. So what you have to do is, because God's name is holy, okay, you have to take out somehow, cut out the name of God from that kli and bury it. What if it wasn't written on like we write today? What if it was engraved in some kind of metal or glass? Okay, so that's also a problem. So there, it's harder to cut out because it's engraved. So vihitia chakli, right? So what if you didn't cut it out? And what if you said, you know what, I'm gonna recycle this kli, right? Or I'm gonna melt it down because it's gold, right? And at $4,300 an ounce, I'm gonna make a lot of money. But you didn't realize, or you did realize, and you didn't care that God's name was actually engraved. Now we're not going to get into it, but there's a whole Talmudic discussion, if you remember, in Gittin, right? In the second chapter of Gittin, it talks about what is considered writing, what's considered engraving, right? Where it's talking about writing a get. The Gemara went on a whole long sidetrack about what's considered ksiva, what's considered hakika, right? You remember chok tochos, right? Anyways, for those who know what I'm talking about, that's in the second chapter of Gittin, if you want to look at it. But anyways, so here, even though over here the name was engraved, that's still considered written. So you have to dispose of it properly. Okay. If you didn't and you melted the kli, and by melting the kli you erased God's name, Harei Zeloke, then you are Chayiv Malkus. So the Rambam is hinting that this is not just one of those things that's a nice thing not to erase God's name. It's actually one of the 365 lavim. Okay. It's one of the no-nos. So what do? Again, you have to cut out God's name somehow, okay, and bury it. Now, obviously, if you don't intend to ever throw away the kli, then you could just leave it on. Just you have to be careful. It's one of those hazards that are in your house that it's better not to have because it could break, you could erase it, It's just not a good thing to have. V'chenim haya shem kasav al besaro. So what if you scribbled with a marker the name of God as a joke, let's say, right, on your stomach? Okay? So now you have God's name on your stomach. Again, not advisable, but now you're in a pickle. Why? Because you would like to clean it off, but you can't. So are you stuck forever? That's the question. You can't take a shower, you can't smear it. Not only that, you're considered holier. You can't walk into a bathroom. You can't go to a garbage dump. You can't go to a jet game. All right, you're stuck. What do you do now? So, not only that, the Rambam says, Nizdam lo tvila shel mitzvah. What happens if you have to go to a mikveh? Okay, so do you say, I can't go to a mikveh? So, the mikveh, we get around by saying what? Says the Rambam, Korach alav gemi v'tovel. What you do is you cover it with some kind of, like a cast, or literally means rubber, but you just cover it with something, and then you go to the mikveh, right? You can't say, oh, I can't go to the mikveh anymore because I have this name written on me. Okay. And if you can't find the gemi, okay, then what you do is you use clothing. Okay, now keep in mind, this is a mikveh. So you're going to say, how could I go into a mikveh with something that's covering me? Right? Isn't that a classic chatzitza? So the Rambam says, in order to get around it, you don't put it on so tight. The point is just to cover it. So if you figure out a way that you cover it just enough, right, so that it's not pressing, or else that becomes a chatzitza, right? Like you can't dunk into a mikveh wearing socks, right? It just doesn't count. You know, if you're like afraid to to stand there because the floor is slimy, right? You can't wear socks, right? So therefore, that's a chatzitza. So here, in order to get around the chatzitza, you wear something that's loose fitting. Shalo amru lichroch alav ela b'nei she'asur lama b'nei Hashem kishu arum. Right? Because the reason why this works is because the reason why you have to have this covering, right, is because you can't stand, right, naked. That's also a problem, the Rambam says, right? The amount of damage you did by writing the name, right, you put yourself in such a predicament that you can't even be naked anymore because you have God's name. So that's why you have to cover it. So that's why it's acceptable to go to the mikveh, because you're covering the name. So you really have no choice. So don't put yourself in a situation like this. Okay, so that's the end of the discussion regarding specifically mechika, erasing God's name. So the Rambam, in a related, now you're going to say, how is the next rule related? But we'll see why. In a related rule, he says in Halacha Zayin, Hasoter afilu even achas derech hashchata min hamizbeach, o min hahechal, o mishar ha'azara loke. What if you go into the Beis Hamikdash, okay, and you start doing damage? You start damaging the stones on the Mizbeach, or you hit the Heichal, or anywhere in the Azara, right? You go in and you start doing damage. Loke. Shenemar bavodas kochavim kies mizbechoton titotzun, v'kasu lotasun ken lashem elokechem. So this is a strange source. But why this Rambam is related to the Mechika is because you remember how we said Mechika, how it started? That the source was from Lau Tasun Kain. Anytime we have a active commandment to destroy Avodah Zarah, there's a reciprocal commandment of not to destroy something that's sanctimonious in Judaism, such as God's name. That's what we've been discussing the last few halachas, or anything God related. So what's another thing God related? A mizbeach, right? The Beis Hamikdash. And because we have a commandment to destroy the Avodah Zarah mizbeach, we have a reciprocal commandment not to destroy our mizbeach. Again, whatever applies to them, the opposite, the reciprocal, applies to us, or the inverse, whatever you want to call it, applies to us. Okay, that's why this is exactly where it's placed in the Rambam. I mean, it's there there are discussions about why the Rambam places things where he places them. Right, everything has a reason. This is a perfect example why two seemingly unrelated halachos, erasing God's name, okay, and destroying the mizbeach, because they stem from the same source. That's why they are juxtaposed in the 6th chapter of Hilchos Yesodei Hatorah. Okay, so that's now, if you remember from Daf Yomi, we spoke about damage done to the mizbeach, right? Remember that? If it's out of service because one of the stones fell out, right? We had that in Samech something about 2.5 weeks ago. So, all right, so that's a little Daf Yomi related. Okay, what's the next thing about destroying that you shouldn't destroy? V'chen hasoref atzei hakodesh. Okay, if you have eitzim, okay, if someone was makdish eitzim to the Beis Hamikdash and you burnt them down, derech hashchasa loke. Now, don't get confused with Bal Tashchis, because Bal Tashchis, at least in the Torah, applies to standing trees and it applies to basically anything. But just like you can't burn, right? Gemara, remember the Gemara in Bava Kama, Tzadi something, talks about burning your own clothing, right? You can't destroy things for no reason. We had a whole class on that a couple of years ago in Bava Kama in the 8th parak. So there's a specific lav about destroying hegdish wood. Okay, your chayiv malchus shenemar, and this is another related thing about lotasun. It says vasharehem tisufun be'esh. Right. The third thing is you have to destroy this. You have to destroy their gods. You have to destroy their mizbeach, and you have to destroy their asherah trees. So what's the reciprocal of that? We can't destroy our holy trees. So if someone donates a tree to the Beis Hamikdash or a firewood to the Beis Hamikdash, we can't destroy it. Beautiful. So that is the third related. Okay. Here's something. One more Shmuel, or cut it?
Save something for tomorrow.
Something? There's 7 more years of this. Something? Okay. Whatever you want, you're the boss. All right, we'll continue tomorrow regarding.
I mean, you're the boss, whatever you want.
I don't know, it's very tempting.
Yes, you're cool.
Okay, I'll take that as a hint. All right.
No, I'm just.
All right.